Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone from the 1980s. This is Season 2, Episode 7. It's called The Road Less Traveled. So spoilers for the episode. This is also a Patreon sponsored review, so thank you very much to Cindy for making the pick. So this is another one story episode, and this episode is about a family man who's living with his wife and young daughter. Who's having nightmares and says she's seeing someone in the house, and there's some like weird flashes where he's also having some kind of like memories. At least that's the way it appears at first, right? Because my initial thought of this episode was that the dad was in Vietnam and he was having some kind of PTSD where his memories were maybe coming to life or something, which they've kind of like touched on that ground before. But that's not actually what it is, because when you eventually see this man who's in the house, it turns out to be the husband again, like another version of him. But this other version of him is in a wheelchair, he's missing his legs, and we also find out during the course of the story that the main character, he never actually went to Vietnam. He actually went to Canada when he was drafted to avoid going to Vietnam, and he has some maybe guilt over that, right? He feels like maybe he let things down, he was a coward or whatever. And once it gets to that point, it's like, okay, this is kind of an interesting premise, because we're kind of like dealing with this idea of like the version of him that could have existed if he'd went to Vietnam is now kind of appearing, and his daughter's even seeing him, the wife even starts seeing him around the house, and things get kind of creepy and they get scared and what you'd expect. And I thought, oh, I wonder if the twist is going to be that the one who went to Vietnam is the real person, and that this is like a fantasy in his head because he is, you know, having a tough life because he has lost his legs and he is maybe, you know, depressed and traumatized from his life in war. And, you know, because it comes up that this guy started dating his wife when they were in school and then he was drafted. And we find out that in the family version of this character's past, the wife went to Canada with them. Like, they went as a couple, as a young couple, and started their life that way, and then came back. You know, he went to like college in Canada or whatever, and then came back to the US at some point at a later date. So I thought, oh, maybe that's the obvious twist, is that this is the fake world, and this is him slowly realizing that he's actually lying on his deathbed in some sort of hospital or something, and he's this the life that he could have had kind of thing. It doesn't do that, and I'm actually kind of happy it didn't exactly go down that path, just because it was maybe the more obvious route to take. It kind of treats it more like, oh, there was a fork in his road once upon a time and both versions exist. It's almost like two parallel dimensions kind of colliding a little bit. And the reason why this is all happening, when he eventually does kind of talk to the other version of himself, is that he's like, yeah, I'm dying. I know I'm dying, and I thought about the life that I could have had, and I somehow ended up actually coming here and seeing it, right? And it becomes clear that no, both of these, because honestly, the biggest critique I have once they start talking to each other, and the wife's there for this entire sequence as well, once they start talking, is that they maybe spell out everything a little bit too much, where they actually say out in the dialogue where there's like, oh, you know, what if I'm the real one and you're the fake one? What if I'm the real one and you're the fake one? And then the one in the wheelchair says, well, what if we're both real? And, you know, there was just a fork in the road all those years ago, and I just managed to click cross over and see what my life could have been. I think that little section of their conversation is the worst part of the episode, because it kind of feels like it's spelling everything out for the audience. In case you've not been thinking of the possibilities, it just goes through all of them in the dialogue in like a 30-second span, and it felt very kind of in your face, over the head, like it was talking down to the audience. So I didn't like that part so much, but once they get talking a bit more, and I think the big thing here is that, you know, up front I thought, oh, this is someone having PTSD of Vietnam, and then we find out that he never went. He literally dodged the draft. Okay, so is this about his guilt of dodging the draft? Is this about that? And, you know, he even, like, at one point has a memory of being in Vietnam, and it becomes clear in this scene when they're talking to each other that happened because they touched, maybe, or at least that's what they think happened, and that leads to kind of how it ends. But it's like, oh, like I'm actually starting to experience some of your memories, right? I'm experiencing some of these like horrific scenes you know, where you were scared in Vietnam and you were dodging explosions. And we do get a quick little snippet of action of like, you know, them walking through. It's all, whenever they show like a flashback or a cutaway to Vietnam, if it's not the focus of the movie, it's just like one quick little thing. It's always walking through kind of swampy water with grass. It's always that type of place they go to. Like for some reason that just screams Vietnam War to people, but that's what they always do in TV shows and movies like this. So, but yeah, they sell this idea that no, both are real in some way, and the Twilight Zone's just letting these two different versions see how their life went. But clearly, once they said he dodged the draft, I was thinking, oh, this is about his guilt of dodging the draft, and it's about him thinking he doesn't deserve the life that he has because he made this choice, you know, at some point in his life. But the way it actually goes, and I appreciate this because it's a little bit more interesting and a bit more different and unique, is that it's not so much that he should feel guilty about that, although he does. It's basically this realization that, you know, the version of him that chose to go to Vietnam feels like he let people down by going in a lot of ways. Not the country per se, because that's kind of like what he's supposedly going for, but this idea that, you know, he left his girlfriend, his wife in this reality, right? He left her behind, and she actually ended up dying in a motorcycle accident with some other guy while he was in Vietnam. His daughter was never born. He feels like he's let down the people that he could have been there for if he'd stayed for those people instead. And I think that was an interesting perspective to take it, is that this one, yeah, the main one does have some regrets and feels like maybe a bit of a coward for dodging the draft. But the one who did go to Vietnam also regrets that decision for different reasons. And it's this kind of realization that either path he picked, there was going to be pros and cons, and there was going to be regrets no matter what. And in many ways, I guess it's a little bit It's a Wonderful Life in some ways. It's not like he hates his life. It's not that he's depressed about his life. He loves his wife. He loves his daughter. He has a good relationship with both of them. It seems like, you know, he has fun with his daughter the whole bit at the start when she's scared to go back to bed, and he, you know, tells her a little story about him having nightmares and says, oh, the sheets will protect you, but not for me. And he does like a little joke with her. It all feels very pleasant. It's all very nice and sort of good father-daughter dynamics. But that daughter doesn't even exist in the other world, and that's like a regret the other one has. And it's like, he made the one in the real world, or the one in the main world we're following, the family man, he made the right personal choice. The other one didn't make the personal choice. He made the choice of duty, the choice for his country or whatever, and they both have different regrets. And I think if anything here at the end, it feels like the one, you know, in the family, like, made the right choices. Like, he has a bit of regrets and guilt perhaps, but like otherwise things seem to be going pretty well, and he really shouldn't be all that upset about like what he could have been instead. So I like that, but there's also this kind of sweet ending. Well, I do have a little critique about the ending, just in the sense of how it looks. They present it in a very kind of cheesy, over-the-top way. But the ending is that, he realizes, hey, I've had some of your memories. I've remembered Vietnam because, you know, we touched, or at least they assume that that's why it happened. What if I give you some of my memories? What if you get to share my memories with me, right? And the Vietnam version of him is like, hey, but that means you're going to, like, if we touch, if we hold hands or hug or whatever it's going to be, you're going to remember everything I went through. You're going to remember, like, you know, hiding in a Vietnamese school. You're going to remember all the bloodshed. You're going to remember all the fear. You're going to remember all these awful memories. And he's like, I've got to live this life. I'll live with those memories, but you get to have the memories of my wedding, of my honeymoon, of my daughter being born, of all these nice things. And it's obviously, it's this kind of generous act and kind of this acceptance that he's another version of himself. But you can also kind of look at it as, like, you know, sometimes the burden of having all these memories is something that he's willing to take on, and you can almost see it more as a, like, if you take the literal out of what's happening on a supernatural level, you could sort of see this as like, no, this is just two halves of one person kind of like realizing they both exist and they both need to exist and having to kind of like share it all, because they kind of, there's this big bright white light as they touch, and there's a couple of quick flashes to these happy memories, and the Vietnam one in the wheelchair, has legs now suddenly and stands up and disappears into a bright light, goes back to where he came from, or possibly even passes away in this moment, and the remaining version and wife just hug, and it's kind of the sweet ending as the narrator takes us out. It's an interesting twist on a very typical story. That typical story being the alternate reality versions of the same person meeting, right? And this idea that one who's much more fortunate than the other gets to give him some happiness, gets to do something nice for the other one to send him on his way. They even say, hey, you can stay for a while if you want. You can hang around. There's no like ill will or weird kind of jealousy of like, oh, you're going to hang around my wife? That's my wife, not your wife, even though you're technically still me. Also, the Vietnam one does have a pretty bad fake beard. I'm not going to hold that against the episode too much, but worth pointing out. But it's kind of a neat little happy twist that it's just a very like pleasant exchange. Like obviously there's this fear at first when there's this mysterious man in the house and they don't know who he is, and then it turns out to be him and that makes them freak out. Like there's some natural tension with there, but once they actually talk to each other and like get into things, it's a lot more of a amicable, sweet relationship, which is a little bit different. And I also appreciated that it became even just a parallel reality kind of story, because that's not what it seemed like at first. At first it felt like, oh, his PTSD from Vietnam's coming to life, because that's what the daughter's seeing. She's seeing someone in her room. At one point he even like sees like the room turn into like a war-torn room in Vietnam. So I'm like, oh, it's going down this one path, but it doesn't. And then once it reveals that this mysterious person showing up is another version of him who's clearly been in the Vietnam War, it is interesting because we've established these things and these choices, and your mind's maybe going to this idea of like, oh, is he here to replace him? Is he here to like steal his life from him because his life is so bad? And part of that is just like traditional alternate reality or parallel dimension stories that we've come to expect. This one actually goes for a much more simpler and sweeter version. And that's why I kind of say that it kind of feels like two halves of the same person kind of reconciling with each other in a lot of ways, because it feels like, no, we're not going to do the whole can I trust the other version of myself thing. They just listen to his story, listen to what he went through, and wondering like all these things that he could have had if not, and then he appeared here. And it didn't pull the, if this was the 2020 version of Twilight Zone, or 2019, whenever that most recent version came out, it would have had like 3 extra twists where he turned out to be a villain who wanted to steal his life. And I'm not even saying that's a bad plot necessarily. That can be a fun plot. We've seen variations on that plot in other mediums, and maybe even in Twilight Zone already. But I appreciate that this didn't go for that. Like we once it got to the idea of who he was and what we were going to do, it was fine. And there's some fun there. Like at one point he runs out the house, the family version, and it just goes and hides in the car for like a day because he's freaked out by what he's seen. The other version calls his wife at her work and makes her come home. And when the family man shows up to her work and is like, hey, I'm here to see my wife, the assistant's like, you called like 5 minutes ago and she went home right after. And he's like, I never called. And he races back home, and that's where the tension is of like, oh, is something bad going to happen? But then when he gets there, everything plays out that I mentioned already with the conversation. And I appreciated as well, it wasn't just the 2 versions of him. The wife is there the entire time. She's like an equal part of the conversation of putting things together, and kind of talks about how, hey, that decision to go to Canada wasn't just yours. Like, I did that with you. That was a mutual choice we made together. So I also have a factor to play in why this version of you ended up the way you did, for better and for worse. So I think it's not like a complete knockout of an episode. Like, I think there's maybe more of a definitive point it could have maybe made by the end. It might have made it feel a bit more special than it actually is. But I think what it does present is that it does set you up for one type of story. It satisfyingly kind of pivots where it's like, oh, this makes sense now that we've pivoted to this one reveal of who this mysterious figure is actually opens a lot of interesting doors. And then even with that, it doesn't go down the path that you would most likely expect it to, and just it kind of gives you a sweet ending. But I do, and I appreciate like him kind of accepting his past, and accepting his past also means kind of like taking on the burden of the other version's past. That's also kind of nice. But I do wonder if maybe a more definitive, like, cool point or message by the end would have just, like, really been the bow on the episode. You know, because when I think of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes, they tend to have a really strong moral or a strong message of some kind, usually. And I think this one, you know, has a vague kind of like, yeah, like, you know, you may have regrets and wonder what your life went, you know, in the other direction, but be happy with, like, what you did get and what you have got. And especially since this guy, for all intent and purposes, there's nothing to suggest that his life is unhappy, right? The Family Man version, like, we don't see anything that, you know, it seems like he has a healthy relationship with both his wife and his daughter. They seem pretty middle class, so money doesn't seem to be a super big worry inherently. So, you know, it's just it's an interesting lens to view this type of premise through, but I also don't think, and that keeps it feeling fresh, but it doesn't go up to the next level. So it's kind of like a really good 7 out of 10 episode, I guess is what I'm saying. You know, but it's not getting into that great territory. Performances are fine. The main actor here, who plays obviously both versions of the father, he did seem familiar. He looked a little bit like Wings Hauser, but he's not Wings Hauser. Not that most of you probably know who that is, actually, now I'm saying that out loud. I just know him because he's in bad movies that I've seen pop up. He had similar kind of hair to him. His name is Cliff DeYoung. He was Mr. Bailey in The Craft. That's apparently what he's most well known for, according to IMDb. He may just look like other people that I've seen rather than he himself being someone that I've seen in a bunch of stuff. I mean, I have seen The Craft, but only once, and it was a long time ago, so I don't know. Maybe other things around the 80s, perhaps? A lot of, like, guesting on episodes of TV, you know, for one episode, but nothing more substantial than that, seemingly. Oh, he was in an episode of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. I probably saw him in that. Oh, the RoboCop TV show. Oh, one episode of X-Files. See, you get the type of actor this is. This is someone who pops up in one episode of a million TV shows. Oh, the Skateboard Kid. I actually have seen that. Admittedly, it's been like 30 years, but I have seen that. Anyway, not that this matters too much. I just thought it was interesting because he seemed so familiar. But yeah, that's the episode pretty much. It's a sweet ending to an episode that has some natural tension. And to its credit, I did think the what shall we call it? The spookiness of, like, the fact that there's this, like, man showing up upstairs in the house. I don't think that felt too tropey. I think there was a worry when it first happened, as, oh, this is going to be like a supernatural kind of like there's a ghost in the house type episode. But I really appreciated that everyone in the family started seeing something. It wasn't just the kids, because the first couple of scenes, the kids saying, hey, there's a man in my room, and they kind of, oh, you're just having a nightmare, it's okay, there's nothing there. I thought it was going to be a lot of not believing the kid for a lot of the episode, but actually quite quickly, the dad sees something. Fairly quickly, the mum also sees something. Like, everyone starts to see something, and it's not just something that's treated as a sort of mistrust MacGuffin or dismissing of what the kid's seen or anything like that. And it kind of makes sense in hindsight that, you know, the other version of the main character was drawn to the kid because he's like, oh, we have a child in this universe. I never had a kid. I want to see what she's like. And maybe unintentionally kind of scared her a little bit. But hey, you know, solid enough episode. Not like completely blown my socks off by any stretch. But having said that, you know, because the start of this season was kind of really middling, I do think interestingly, these episodes that have been half an hour and just full stories for that half hour, or, well, 24 or 5 minutes without ads, they have probably been the best episodes of this season, which is interesting because that's the format of the original show. Now, admittedly, they don't hold a candle to like the 2 or 3 best episodes or stories from the first season, admittedly. So I don't think it really means much. It's just kind of amusing to me that the ones that are more like the old show are actually the best of this season so far. But yeah, we'll see what comes next time on 80s Twilight Zone. I'm just double checking. Yeah, next one's back to 2 stories taking up the full like 45 minutes or whatever. So we'll see how that pans out next time. But let me know what you thought of this episode of the 80s Twilight Zone in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff helps out a bunch if you do. And of course, you can support everything over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. But that is me. Thank you for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.